Hall, Angel Place, for this third debate for 2011. My name is Geraldine Doog and I'm delighted to chair tonight's debate. And our topic tonight, if we keep populating, we will perish. So I'd like to introduce on the four sides, Dick Smith, Senator-elect Larissa Waters and Professor Steve Keen. Now, against the motion, if we keep populating, we will perish, Father Frank Brennan, Wayne Goss and Dr Tanvir Ahmed. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome all our special speakers tonight?
Thank you very much. Keep populating. Well, obviously this statement is referring to our present system of exponential growth in population. We all know the facts. Took over 10,000 years to get to 1 billion. Now every 16 years we get another billion, 80 million a year increase. The growth pattern is now it's completely vertical. And it's not 9 billion anymore. The United Nations says we're going to go to 10 billion. If Australia grows at the record rate we did the year before last, 2.1% means our population doubles every 30 years. 100 million by the end of this century, 1 billion in 220 years, the time of modern Australia. We're addicted to growth. We already have 1 billion people hungry in this world, while the other side will be spruiking growth. Now, we can have a fantastic economic system without perpetual growth in consumption and resources. Ladies and gentlemen, if we keep populating, that is, to keep exponentially increasing our population, our human civilization as we know it today will undoubtedly collapse. Thank you.
And the first speaker for the negative, Frank Brennan.
And so our argument to you tonight is that indeed there will be inevitable increases in population in the world. Yes, we in Australia do have more control over some matters, but let's now look at what we do control. Why we're in a privileged situation in Australia is, of course, that we now have a very educated population. And as great writers like Amartya Sen have made very clear, what contributes most on arguments about fertility is the education and the availability of work for the women in your society. And what we do know is that 42% of the world's population live in low fertility countries like Australia. And we're not going to be contributing significantly to that vast increase in the world population which is to confront us by the end of this coming century. Thank you.
Second speaker for the affirmative, Larissa Waters.
Good evening, everyone. Now, I come from southeast Queensland, which until very recently was the fastest growing region of Australia. The most biodiverse regions of Australia are, of course, the Great Barrier Reef in my home state and our tropical rainforests. And yet overpopulation and the associated effects of climate change and escalating mining and urban activities are threatening the natural values of those areas. Now, population growth is the first driver in a complex chain of both direct and indirect effects on biodiversity. It really does underpin and exacerbate every other threat to our ecological life support systems. So the link between population growth and threats to Australia's ecosystems is clear. Intergenerational equity, not to mention interspecies equity, demands that we not accept unsustainable population growth as inevitable. Thanks, everyone.
Can we hear now, please, from Wayne Goss, the second speaker for the negative?
Ladies and gentlemen, if Australia doesn't increase its population, do you know what will happen? We'll get older. We'll get less productive. We'll lose our spark. And do you know what happens after you age and get greyer and greyer and greyer? You perish. Think about it. So, population increase is fundamental to a better and a stronger Australia. Now, we are in the next phase of the resources boom, as you know. We don't have the workforce, we don't have the skilled workforce to realise the benefits of that resources boom. And while you may think I'm talking about the resources boom, I'm talking about the resources boom in the short term. In the long term, what that builds is a better and stronger Australia.
I welcome now the third speaker for the affirmative, Steve Keen.
You're not just a sophisticated audience, you're a very peculiar one. Look around. There's something really strange about this audience. Can you tell? You're all bipedal monkeys. 20 years ago, one very bright monkey that Larissa's already referred to, William Rees, worked out the idea of a human ecological footprint, which said, how much of the planet can we actually use in a reproductive sense? How many hectares do we have to work with, and how many are we using? And compare the two, and he called the ratio the footprint. And the first one, which is the number of hectares we have to use, standardising for farming and grazing and mining and so on, came out at 12 billion. Now, working back to 1961, we were using 8 billion hectares then. So at that time, 60% of the planet was being used to keep bipedal monkeys happy, and 40% was left for the other species. By 1977, we had the whole 12 billion, so the rest of the species had zero. Today, our total is 18 billion hectares. As Larissa said, 1.5 times the planet's capacity. Now, that's like living off a bank account, off both the principal and the interest. You'll live really well, and the more of the principal you spend now, the better you'll feel, and then you'll die. You can't live off the principal, you must live off the interest. It's our responsibility. Thank you.
And Tanveer Ahmed, the third speaker for the negative.
We are a society that began and progresses without grand design or grand mythology, but partly by default and partly good management, has developed into arguably the most diverse and integrated society of the developed world. Since Federation, there have been moves to curb immigration, from the labour movement worried about cheap labour, threatening unskilled workers, from groups worried about social cohesion, and from geographers and environmental groups expressing their concerns about the carrying capacity of our parched continent, when in fact we already have the highest per capita refugee intake in the developed world. While initial waves of post-war migration comprised of relatively unskilled and helped with massive infrastructure schemes, recent decades have focused on employer-driven skilled labour. Their needs have driven our economy further, enriched the culture and fabric of our nation, and their children are, by and large, through their disproportionate drive and entrepreneurialism, even more successful.
Well, thank you, lady and gentlemen, for all of those contributions.